We don't wanna go to class today, but the lady with the card say nay, nay, nay. We're gonna combo all day, all day, all day. Where there's a class, there's a day. Hi! It's time for Goblin Combo Part 2. Today we're up against Tolarian Terror. Goblin Combo is about taking Putrid Goblin here and then getting benefits from doing things to him. This is the second match of like a tournament, and I can't wait to see how it goes. I win the die roll and I'm going first, which is really important with this hand, because this is a slow hand. We do nothing turn 1 or 2, and we're up against one of the most tempo-y decks in the whole format. 2 chances to combo. We have both the Skirk Prospect and can find Putrid Imp, and most importantly, like this guy. He can block for days. I love this hand. Let's go. At the start of every match, you still don't know what your opponent is playing, and there's this magical moment when they just, play an island, you go, oh no, it's blue. Now you have to figure out which of the spells do you want to never ever have resolved. But it doesn't matter for me this time. For now, I've played a Swarm, and then I've had to return that Swarm to my hand with Arachnoid's Canarium. This leaves me with exactly 7 cards in hand, because I didn't draw for my first turn. I don't know what my opponent's playing, but since he's taking a long time in his upkeep and draw step, I'm starting to think, oh no, this is Terror, isn't it? It could also be some sort of blue fairies deck, but they would have played a creature by now or something. There's not a lot of decks that will put down 2 islands and simply pass the turn. So at this point I'm going, this is the Terror deck, isn't it? And I don't want it to be the Terror deck. I know that deck and I'm scared of it. Want to resolve my Goblin Matron, but my opponent is holding 2 blue open, so instead I play the Muck War Marshal. I assumed it would be countered, but I'd rather have my combo pieces resolved than those being countered, so we just sacrifice the Muck War Marshal to the blue mana. If this is the Terror deck, which this Brainstorm really tells me it is, at least it's not having the fastest start. It hasn't milled a lot of spells into its graveyard, and the snakes still cost a lot of mana from this point. If he still holds 2 blue open mana at the end of this turn, I'm gonna have to find another thing that I can, get countered. Because the thing about the Terror deck is it wants to counter your spells, not just to get rid of them, but also to get spells into their graveyard, so the snakes get cheaper faster. My opponent does keep 2 blue open, but it doesn't mean he has another counter spell, because it can also be self-mill spells. This deck always holds mana open, so this time I'll try my Goblin Matron and assume that there was only 1 counter spell in my opponent's hand, and that this time he wants to mill himself with Mental Note and Thought Scour. And I am correct, the Goblin Matron gets to resolve, which means I get a Putrid Imp to my hand, and I have a chump blocker for the first snake when it eventually comes out. However, it does also mean that my opponent's probably going to put a whole bunch of spells into his graveyard right now. There's the first Mental Note, and that Brainstorm he played before makes sure that he gets full of spells into the graveyard, because he puts 2 spells on top of his deck. And then a Lorien Reveal makes sure he has 6 spells in the grave now, and enough lands to cast 2 Cryptic Snakes, or up to 4 Tolarian Terrors. It's kind of funny, I feel like I know my opponent's deck better than I know my own. That's probably true, because I've played it a lot more. And I'm not sure whether my opponent has any more counterspells in hand since the Matron resolved, but if he doesn't and he taps out for snakes and monsters, I can actually go off with infinite mana this turn. My opponent plays the first Tolarian Terror, taps the second mana. I hope it's not a second one. It's a Delver of Secrets, which is, I'm so happy to see that guy right now over like a 5/5 snake. This means that my Goblin Matron can just chop the snake, take 3 if the Delver flips, and then I still have a good amount of time to find a way to go off. However, my opponent is once again holding 2 blue open, and I have to figure out whether those 2 blue are a counterspell or not. The only way I can figure that out is by playing into it. So I play this Muck War Marshal. It serves 2 purposes. It can bait out a counterspell, and it can also be sacrificed for mana if Skirk Prospector resolves alone. My Muck War Marshal resolving kind of tells me there's no counterspells, because that's a lot of free blockers against my opponent, so I go for it. I play the Skirk Prospector and it also resolves. I could go all in on the combo right now if I want to. So first I sacrifice the Muck War Marshal for red mana, And then it creates a goblin. I can play the putrid imp from my hand. My opponent still doesn't counter. And then the question is, will he counter my first day of class? I sacrifice both goblins to play it. And he has a spell pierce, which means I could sacrifice 2 goblins to pay for it. But since I have a second first day of class in hand, I would rather just be happy with having all my combo pieces in play. And then next turn I can play a first day of class and hold mana open to pay for, let's say, a second spell pierce. My opponent shows a Lauren revealed on the upkeep, flipping that Delver into a 3/2 flyer. Which means I will take at least 3 damage. The snake I can block for a while, and I don't even need to. I can combo off next turn. The only thing is, how many counter spells does my opponent have in hand? I saw a Lauren reel off the top of his deck, and he's considering now whether he wants to remove it from the top of his deck before he draws. If he chooses to keep it, it's probably because he wants to cast it to refill his hands with snakes and counter spells. And if he taps out, there's no free counter spells that he can play. There's one in Pauper, but this deck wouldn't run it. And then I can combo off with no problem. In the end, he keeps it on top, draws the Lauren revealed, plays a land, then attacks me for the full 8. And I could block here to only take 3 damage, but I have so much life to give off of that I choose to take the full 8, going down to 12. And if I get to go off next turn, it doesn't matter how low my life is, having more goblins is better. My opponent does tap out to draw 3 cards instead of holding or faking a counterspell. But if he has no counterspell, there's not much point in faking it either, I guess. But I'll never know now. So this is when our starting hand really came together. Having 2 first day of class in hand was really good. So we play the second first day of class. I love saying that. And now all our creatures enter, or when they enter, they get a +1/+1 counter, which means I can sacrifice the Putrid Goblin for red mana. It comes back with a minus counter from Persist, and then I put a plus counter on it afterwards with the first day of class. And then I've created a loop with adding me 1 mana that I can do infinitely. First day of class finds something called Introduction to Prophecy, which is a 3 mana, scry 2, draw 1. But I don't even need that. I have this Shred Memory, which has Transmute. Transmute lets me find a card in my deck with the same mana cost as Shred Memory. I find Makeshift Munition. For 1 mana, I can sacrifice a creature to do 1 damage. And I can sacrifice my Imp Goblin thing forever, and I also have all the mana in the world, and that's GG for the first game. For sideboarding, I need my spells to resolve. My opponent has a lot of counter magic, so I'm bringing in 4 red elemental blasts to counter those counters. I take out 2 Goblin Sledders. I don't think I need them to combo off with, and on their own they're pretty useless since I'm fighting 5/5 snakes. The Goblin Surgeon also isn't super important because my opponent is running no destroy spells and no direct damage spells. And then I took out one of these dragon draw things because I think I have enough draw in my deck. My opponent takes out all his boomerangs, which I'm not sure is correct because boomerang does stop me comboing off. If I play a first day of class and you return my goblins to my hand, I can no longer combo. Sleep of the Dead does nothing in this matchup, since, you don't want to tap a 1/1 goblin with. Spell Pierce seems good in the matchup. However, what my opponents bring in are all really good cards. It's 5 things that counter red spells, that's 5 more 1 mana spells to counter first day of class, and Dispel, another 2 things that counter first day of class for 1 mana. I'm on the draw, and this is a pretty slow hand. It's a Swamp turn 1, so I can't play my 1-drop, and turn 2 takes all my mana away, which against snakes is scary. I do have one of my combo pieces, and Mock War Marshal plus Village Rites is good draw, and Red Elemental Blast can hopefully buy me the time that I'm losing otherwise. So I'm keeping this hand, but mostly because I don't want to go down to 5. My opponent keeps a full hand of 7 cards, so I have to hope his hand is kind of slow because I won't be doing anything for the first 2 turns. My opponent in my end step casts a Mental Note, milling himself for 2. Luckily, he hits no spells, so all his snakes are still only 1 cheaper. This is very good news for me because it means I won't be having to kill any snakes, before I have 3 mana. It's scary to stare down the snakes when you don't have anything to play. Luckily, my opponent follows up with a Brainstorm. There's no Delvers, there's no pressure so far. And I do still have a Pyroblast, so whenever I do want to cast something, I can keep a red open and start countering a response in case my opponent has a lot of counter spells, which I suspect he does, because that hand has to be full of something. My guess is the Brainstorm put 2 spells back on top of the deck that then 1 mana will then Thought Scour or Mental Note away. He passes the turn to me, and I have to think, do I want to play my Rakdos Canarium and return this land to my hand? Or do I want to draw this land that only makes colorless, or can tap to search for a tap basic? I play the Twisted Landscape, and that's because my opponent showed me Boomerang before, and Boomerang is really good against the bounce lands. Not only do you bounce your own land, if you have it bounced again, you then have to bounce another land to ever get it into play. It's an awful experience. So I'd rather just play a land that comes into play tap, technically. My opponent played a Thought Scour on himself during my end step, milling 2 spells into the graveyard that he put on top of the library himself with Brainstorm. And now I think his snakes cost 1 to 2 mana, which is really bad for me. I don't even have red up to counter with a Pyroblast. Luckily so far it's just a Delver of Secrets, which is a weird sentence to say. Just a 3/2 flyer for 1 mana, not a 5/5. I have no play, so I crack my Twisted Landscape to find a mountain. This way on my turn, and going forward I can hope open for that Pyroblast in case my opponent casts a snake. But I am worried it will just be countered in response as well. I have this weird habit of picking my land up before I play the Rakdos Canarium, as if it's a cost of it, but I do remind myself to play it and then bounce the land. I hold 1 red mana open in case I want to counter something. I let this Mental Note resolve, since the snakes are already cheap anyway, and it doesn't manipulate the top for the Delver to flip. There's no point in countering it over something that's actually a threat or a counter spell for my things. On flipping my Delver, my opponent shows a counterspell. This makes me very unhappy, because now I know he has at least 1 counterspell, and that 3/2 flyer is a clock. The worst part is I'm way behind. My opponent has something that attacks me and 4 mana open to stop anything I can do. He attacks me for 3 in the air, and I have played nothing, so I just have to take it. Now I have to find a way to start resolving my combo pieces through at least 1 counterspell. That is the Tolarian Terror. I need to counter this spell, but I already know my opponent has a counter spell, so I have to just burn this. My opponent shows me a Hydroblast in response, which makes me sad, because then I know there's another counter spell in his hand, and I have to deal with 8 damage on the board now somehow. A Mock War Marshal can give me blockers for 3 turns, so I want to try and bait out a counterspell by playing my Putrid Goblin first, which is a weird thing to say, because that's my combo piece, but I can't bring it back from the graveyard or get new ones. For now, I think the idea is to somehow block, so I'm baiting a counterspell out, but my opponent simply lets it resolve, and then I think, you know what, if that resolves, surely Mock War Marshal will also resolve. Mock War Marshal, that's really hard to say. And it also resolves, so I get a 1/1 Goblin when it enters and when it dies. Just, my opponent needs a moment to think about it. There's my Goblin. Let's go. I have blockers for days now, and I resolved the combo piece. But I do know my first day of class will run into at least 1 counterspell right now. So I have to find a way around that, and I don't know how to do that from here. My opponent plays another Thought Scour, milling himself for 2 and drawing a card. However, I'm starting to notice that there are no boomerangs in the graveyard, and there's also no deep analysis, so either my opponent is just really unlucky with the self-mill, or I don't have to fear those cards anymore. My opponent then swings for 8. I choose not to block anything and just go all the way down to 9. I feel like I should have blocked with the Mock War Marshal here, but on my upkeep I want to sacrifice it to a Village Rite to draw 2 cards. This is kind of a greedy play, but my opponent has no reach such as Burn Spell, so as long as I have blockers for the snakes, I'm not dead anytime soon. I play the Village Rite in my upkeep, drawing 2 if my opponent doesn't counter it. And I do know my opponent has at least 1 counter spell. I saw it from the Delver flip. But once again, my opponent seems to just let things resolve. And I'm happy about it. I can draw 2. But the problem is then I still have to somehow resolve a first day of class eventually. I have 4 power on the board, so if I get 1 more power, maybe I can trade out with the Tolarian Terror. I try to play a Goblin Matron. 1, it will give me 5 power on the board. 2, it'll get me another Goblin from my deck, which could be a combo piece. My opponent shows me another Hydroblast countering the Goblin Matron, which is again very sad because he has 2 mana open and I know he has another counterspell. Not that it matters this turn, I'm tapped out. We're back at staring down the 8 power of my opponent, which he immediately sends my way. I block the snake this time, only taking 3, going down to 6. And now I'm starting to realize I should have probably blocked the snake the first time too. I can only take 2 more hits from a Delver, and there's another Delver, so I'm dead next turn if that one flips. And my opponent has 4 mana open and a counter spell in the hand, so this is looking very bleak. I play no lightning bolts, I play no black removal spells, I have no way of getting rid of the Delvers other than the Pyroblast, which would be countered anyway if I tried to play it. So I have to somehow lure a counter spell out of my opponent's hand and hope that that Delver just, stays the little guy. So I play my Goblin Matron, the foil one. Surely that one will take out the counter spell. Sadly, it's another Hydroblast and not the counter spell I want to get rid of. After that, I try to cast my Skirk Prospector, which isn't infinite mana right now, but will make any first day of class infinite mana. And that does draw out the counter spell. Now I just have to hope those Delvers don't flip, and that next turn I can do something powerful. And the Delver doesn't flip. There's no spell on top of my opponent's deck. He swings in for 8. I can block the snake and only take 3. He considered attacking with the normal Delver, but I have a 2/2. I go down to 3, which means the flip Delver kills me next turn, even if I block the snake. So this is it. I have to find either a way to go off now, or to generate a bunch of blockers that can somehow fly. It looks very tough, and I need to find a way to combo off this turn. There's no way I'm living through next turn, so I have to find some sort of line that at least results in an attempt to win. And I do see it. It just takes me a while, because as I said, this is the first time I'm actually piloting this deck. But I can play the Goblin Matron, which I do here. And when it resolves, I can then go find the Skirk Prospector, put it into my hand, and then I can cast it. Now I have no more mana, but I have 2 goblins I can sacrifice. So I can sacrifice the Goblin Matron and the Putrid Goblin. And while the Persist trigger is on the stack in the graveyard, I then have 2 mana. First day of class is an instant, so I can cast it with the 2 mana. When Putrid Goblin comes back, it'll lose its counter, and it all resolves. I find the line. I now have infinite mana. I can keep sacrificing the Putrid Goblin to the Skirk Prospector, and I'll get a +1/+1 counter. However, I don't think I have any way to win in my hand, but I do get this introduction to Prophecy, so I have to, in the top 3 cards of my deck, find something that with infinite mana can win the game. I put 2 cards on the bottom, and then I draw. And is it something that wins the game? No. It is Mock War Marshal, which makes a bunch of blockers, but they cannot block anything that flies. I'm looking through my hand and grave for something I can do with infinite mana. I have a tutor, but it requires black mana, and I have no black mana left. I have to pass and stare down. The second Delver flips, and then I concede. I should have conceded anyway. That was a really close match. If I had blocked that first Tolarian Terror, I might have won it, because I could have maybe stalled for another turn or so. So I think that was my main mistake, not blocking whenever I could. Our final game, we have a weird hand. But what I do like about this hand is it has the combo pieces, and Unearth is extra safety. If one of my spells that I combo off with is countered, I can bring it back from the graveyard. And my opponent seems very focused on countering my spells that I cast before first day of class instead of first day of class. So I think this hand can be really good. We will need to draw something that either draws or pay off to the combo and just win really fast. My opponent plays very little interaction, so I want to play out this Skirk Prospector right away, even though it's a combo piece. My opponent can't really kill it once it's hit the battlefield, so I feel safe putting it right away. Oh, that's a Hydroblast. Okay, I guess that was all wrong. So now I have one less Skirk Prospector in play, but it's okay. Now I have a target for my Unearth, I guess. My second turn, as always, is a Rakdos Canarium. It didn't get boomeranged last game, so I think it won't either this one. But that does mean I do nothing turn 2, but seeing as my opponent spent the entire first turn killing a 1-1, I think I'm okay just being a bit slow. I won't see any snakes anytime soon. This Brainstorm might be a problem if it sets up a really good self-mill though. My turn 3 play is very strong. It is the good old Goblin Matron who can go find a Putrid Goblin I can combo off with. My opponent does have one blue open, and I assume this would be countered, and I also want it to be countered if it's a Hydroblast or Blue Elemental Blast. Great, that's one less counter spell that can target first day of class. However, my opponent has done no self-mill. He still has 3 spells in the graveyard, so it's not impossible I see a turn 3 snake, but it is unlikely. There's the mental note, so it hits 2 spells blindly, so that's enough to start playing those snakes down. And I really wish I had some blockers, because they always have one of them. That's the Tolarian Terror, a 5-5 against my board of nothing. This isn't too terrible though. I'm still fine on card advantage. I just need to find a way to leave the pressure on the board. The best way to do it is to use this Unearth to get the Goblin Matron back. Not only does that give me a blocker for the snake, but it also creates card advantage because I can go find one of those combo pieces like the Putrid Goblin. But instead, I find Mock War Marshal, which is even more blockers, and I play that as well, creating another Goblin token. And now this snake has to find its way through like 4 1-1s if it wants to do anything this game. Knowing me, perhaps it won't even get to be blocked by a 1-1 because I have this habit of just throwing my health away for no reason. Hopefully this time it won't be the same. Well, the secret is he attacks for 5 and I take 5 going down to 15 instead of using one of my 1-1s to block with. And it's for the same reason as last time. I want to use a Village Rites on my Mock War Marshal as the trigger for the Echo goes on the stack. So I can technically sacrifice a creature that would die anyway. But I should have still blocked with the 1-1 saving 5 lives. My opponent in the meantime has played another Tolarian Terror and a Delver of Secrets. So suddenly I'm staring down a lot of damage. 13 to be precise. I've cast Village Rites on my Mock War Marshal as it was about to die, letting me draw 2 cards. But I have to wait with creating the 1-1 and drawing the cards. My opponent might want to counter it. But he lets it resolve. I don't know if it's because he doesn't have a counter spell or not. But I'm very happy that that resolved. Otherwise, I would have had nothing left. I draw for turn afterwards because I did it in my upkeep. And don't forget, if you do something in your upkeep, you still have a draw step after. Also, don't forget to do things in your upkeep before you draw. I played the Sylvia Life Staff, which apparently I sideboarded again after the second match to get one of those into my deck, and I forgot to mention it. What it does, it's an equipment I can equip to my creature for 1 mana, and if that creature dies, I gain 3 life. It also gives the creature +1/+0. Against an aggressive deck, it can be a few extra lives, but it can also combo with the Putrid Goblin and a Skirk Prospector to give you infinite life, which is very good. My opponent begins the next phase of his game plan, which is making sure all those 1 mana draw 1 card spells in his deck gets out of his hand so he can either find more snakes or more counter spells. And now the race is on. I have to survive this onslaught of damage long enough to find my combo. My opponent attacks with everything and I double block the snakes. And while I do take 3 damage from the Delver of Secrets, I also gain 3 life because Goblin Matron dies while the Sylvia Life Staff is equipped. I use the Village Rites to sacrifice my Goblin, that's why I gain the life before damage. But once damage resolves and that Delver does 3, I'm back down to 15, which is still a precarious life total against this much power on the board. And I can't get rid of his creatures, I can only keep surviving or combo. So that's what I'm gonna try and do. We cast the first day of class. We have none of the combo pieces in play. My opponent has to cast a Thought Scour, milling 2 to find some way to deal with the first day of class. Because when you see first day of class, you know it's comboing time. He doesn't find any way to counter it, and that lets me go find this Introduction to Prophecy from my deck, my sideboard into my hand, and you know what that does? Sadly, I don't have a way to go off, so I just play it. All of that was 5 mana to scry 2 and draw a card. But if you don't have it, this is the good thing. You can just use first day of class to get a draw spell and try to build up a new hand. And when you do this, it's pretty evident that you have a second first day of class in hand, and we love the second first day. I have to pass to my opponent, and my opponent has 13 damage on the board, and I have no blockers and only an colorless mana, so I have to take it and go down to 2. So this is it. This is probably my last chance to go off. My opponent still has 2 cards in hand, and I'm worried what they are. If they are some sort of counter magic, I'm screwed, but it's another snake. And then Deadly Pressure is already way over the top. All they need is a Delver to kill me, so I'm happy to see more snakes in this situation, rather than some sort of counter spell. I top deck the Skirk Prospector, which was the only thing I needed to win still. I cast my first day of class, the last one didn't get countered and this one doesn't either. So I go get an Introduction to Prophecy from my sideboard into my hand, and then I play the Skirk Prospector. It also doesn't get countered, and I assume the Putrid Goblin won't either. And now I have a combo of infinite life on the board. First, you have to sacrifice the Putrid Goblin to the Skirk Prospector an infinite amount of time. It comes back with a minus counter, but it gets a plus counter from the first day of class. Then you have to use that infinite mana to keep equipping the Sylvia Lifestaff, and then when it's equipped, sacrifice it for a mana. And that way you gain 3 life each loop, and that's infinite life. So now I have a lot of life. Now I have to find a way to kill my opponent, so I play my Introduction to Prophecy, which lets me scry 2, and I see a makeshift munition on the top of my deck. I have to scry one of them to the button, draw the other one, and then I play it, which is just a kill. GG. So I didn't expect to beat Tolarian Terror, and after the loss against Boros Bully, I was kind of worried this would just be a whole like 0-4 tournament, but then we won, and that's crazy. It does help a lot that I know the opponent's deck very well. The Goblin Combo is a lot more resilient than I thought. Especially this version of it where you can make a bunch of 1/1s and block, and there's like so many ways to win. Dark Dweller Oracle, Goblin Slitter, the Dragon. Granted, I seem to only do it with makeshift munitions, but I don't know why. I think you should try this deck for yourself. There's a lot of good versions out there that can draw even more cards to find the combo even faster, but are less like good at being beaten, like hit with big sticks, like a snake eats your face. Anyways, like, subscribe, find my Ko-Fi, find my YouTube. This is my YouTube. Find my Twitch if you want. There's no magic on my Twitch. Bye!